I'm Judith Wilson, 62 years old. Yesterday, I turned my key, pushed open my front door, and stepped into an empty house. Everything gone. A note on the kitchen counter explained it all. My son Douglas had sold every piece of furniture I owned to finance his Paris trip with his wife. Family heirlooms, antiques, all gone. Beneath the note lay a check for $200 and a receipt showing sales totaling over $30,000. Before I share how my own child could do this to me, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you've ever trusted someone who betrayed you, and subscribe to join our community of survivors who refuse to be victims forever. Douglas was always my pride and joy. When my husband Mark died of a sudden heart attack, Douglas was only 12 years old. The loss devastated us both. But somehow, I found the strength to keep going for my son's sake. I was determined to give him everything, despite being a single mother with limited resources. I worked 2 jobs teaching elementary school during the day and waitressing on weekends. Sleep became a luxury as I juggled work, Douglas's activities, and household responsibilities. While other teachers spent summers relaxing, I took administrative positions to earn extra income. Every penny went toward Douglas's future. "Mom, you work too hard," he would say occasionally. But the pride in his eyes when he got accepted to that private high school made every exhausted night worthwhile. I remember pushing away my own dreams. I'd always wanted to get my master's degree in literature because Douglas's education took priority. The university fund came before my retirement savings. His needs always came before mine. When Douglas graduated from college debt-free thanks to my careful planning and sacrifice, I felt I'd accomplished my mission as a parent. I had raised a kind, successful young man who would make his mark on the world. I helped with the down payment on his first house, draining what little savings I had left. "It's an investment in your future," I told him, waving away his half-hearted protests. 5 years ago, Douglas married Rachel. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and clearly from money. Their wedding was elaborate far beyond what I could contribute to, though I emptied my modest savings account trying. Rachel's parents paid for most of it, making me feel inadequate despite Douglas's assurances that it didn't matter. Looking back, I can pinpoint when things began to change. Rachel always had expensive tastes, designer clothes, luxury vacations, gourmet restaurants. Douglas started working longer hours, taking on additional projects. His calls became less frequent. Our Sunday dinners often canceled last minute. When they did visit, Rachel would walk around my home with a critical eye. "This couch must be an antique," she'd say, running her hand along my well-worn but beloved sofa, the one Mark and I had purchased when we first got married. I didn't realize she wasn't complimenting it, but appraising it. "Mom, you have so many beautiful things," Douglas commented during their last visit, 3 months ago. "Have you ever had them valued?" Rachel chimed in, "Your style is so vintage." These pieces would sell for a fortune in the right market. I didn't think much of it then. I was simply happy to have my son visiting, even if Rachel's presence always left me feeling somehow inadequate in my own home. Then came their offer to modernize my living space. "We could help you update, Mom," Douglas suggested. "Some of these pieces are so outdated." "I like my things," I replied. "They have memories." "Memories gather dust," Rachel said with a tight smile. "Sometimes it's good to make room for new experiences. I should have seen the signs." Douglas began visiting more frequently, always with specific questions about certain furniture pieces. Where did I get my grandfather's roll-top desk? Did I have the original paperwork for my grandmother's china cabinet? Was my dining room set a genuine Stickley? "Just curious," he'd say. Dad always talked about the history of these pieces. I was touched that he seemed interested in family history. Proud that he wanted to know about his heritage. Foolish. So foolish. 2 weeks ago, Douglas asked for a spare key to my house. "Just in case there's ever an emergency, Mom. You live alone, and I worry." I handed it over without hesitation. My perfect son, always looking out for his mother. Last Friday, my sister Marilyn invited me to spend the weekend at her lake house. "You never take time for yourself, Judy," she insisted. "It'll be good for you to relax for a couple of days." Douglas called that same evening. "You should go, Mom. You deserve a break." So I went. I spent a peaceful weekend with my sister, completely unaware that back home, my son was systematically dismantling my life. The silence hit me first when I opened the door. Houses have a particular sound, the subtle creaks of furniture, the way sound bounces off surfaces. My house sounded wrong. Hollow. Empty. I stepped into my living room and froze. The antique Persian rug gone. The leather armchair where Mark used to read the Sunday paper gone. The bookshelves that held 40 years of collected memories gone. I turned slowly, my mind struggling to process what my eyes were seeing. Every room the same, stripped bare. In the kitchen, all that remained was my refrigerator and stove, too difficult to move quickly, I would later realize. On the counter sat a plain white envelope. With trembling hands, I opened it to find a check for $200 and a handwritten note in my son's familiar handwriting. Mom, Rachel and I have decided to make our dream move to Paris. We've liquidated some assets to finance our new venture, including your outdated furniture, which was just gathering dust. We've left you enough to get some nice new pieces from IKEA. You'll thank us for the modernization. We'll call once we're settled. Love, Douglas. Beneath this note was a receipt carelessly left behind, or perhaps intentionally included to show how valuable my outdated possessions truly were. The total, $32,750. My legs gave out, and I sank to the kitchen floor. The room spun as the magnitude of the betrayal crashed over me. My grandmother's piano that had survived 2 world wars sold. The oak bed frame my grandfather had carved by hand gone. My mother's jewelry box with the few precious pieces I'd inherited nowhere to be found. I fumbled for my phone and called Douglas. Straight to voicemail. I left a message that started calm but ended with me shouting through tears. Then I texted him. Douglas, call me immediately. What have you done? No response. I checked Facebook, planning to send another message, blocked. Instagram blocked. Even LinkedIn blocked. My son had systematically cut off all communication. With shaking hands, I opened my laptop and searched for local online marketplaces. There they were, my possessions, labeled as vintage treasures and mid-century finds. My dining room table advertised as authentic 1,940 seconds. Craftsmanship for $3,500. My grandmother's piano listed as antique baby grand, excellent condition for $8,000. My life, my memories, my history, all reduced to selling points and price tags. The timestamps on the listings told their own story. Some were posted weeks ago, with contingent sales pending. This wasn't an impulsive decision. This was calculated, planned methodically while Douglas pretended to care about family history. I called my sister, barely able to form coherent sentences through my tears. Judy? What's wrong? Are you hurt? Marilyn's concerned voice only made me cry harder. Douglas. He's taken everything. Sold it all. The house is empty. What? That can't be right. There must be some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. He left a note. He and Rachel. They've gone to Paris. They sold my furniture to pay for it. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Then, I'm coming to get you. Pack whatever's left. You're staying with me until we figure this out. As I waited for my sister, I wandered through my empty house like a ghost. The walls held rectangular patches of unfaded paint where art had hung for decades. Indentations in the carpet marked where furniture had stood. In my bedroom, I found a few clothes scattered on the floor of my closet, items deemed not valuable enough to sell, I supposed. The doorbell rang, and for a fleeting moment, I hoped it was Douglas coming to tell me it was all a mistake. Instead, my neighbor Karen stood there, her expression concerned. Judith, are you all right? I saw the moving truck yesterday and was worried. Moving truck? My voice sounded distant, even to my own ears. Yes, big one. Douglas told me you were downsizing, moving to a retirement community. Said he was handling everything for you. Her eyes widened as she peered past me into the empty house. Oh my God, Judith. What's happened? That was how I discovered that my son had hired professional movers, telling them and the neighbors that he was helping his aging mother transition to smaller accommodations. He had created a perfect cover story. Who would question a devoted son helping his elderly mother? By the time Marilyn arrived, I had moved beyond tears to a cold, empty rage that somehow felt worse. Unfortunately, Mrs. Wilson, this is going to be a complicated case. Barbara Jenkins, a silver-haired attorney with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed the documents spread across her desk. My sister Marilyn sat beside me, occasionally squeezing my hand in support. "I don't understand," I said. "He stole from me. Isn't that straightforward?" Barbara sighed. "I wish it were. The problem is this document." She held up a paper I vaguely remembered signing about 3 months ago. "This gives Douglas power to manage household assets on your behalf." "But that was for tax purposes," I protested. "Douglas said adding him to my accounts and deed would simplify my estate planning and reduce tax burden." "That may have been what he told you, but the language here is quite broad." Barbara put on her reading glasses and quoted, "I hereby authorize Douglas Wilson to act as agent in fact regarding the management, sale, or transfer of household goods and property at 1742 Maple Street. This gives him legal cover for selling your possessions." The realization hit me like a physical blow. "He planned this. All of it. It appears so," Barbara confirmed gently. "And there's another complication. When you added Douglas to your home's deed last year, again, for estate planning," I interrupted. "So the house would automatically go to him without probate when I died?" "Yes, but legally speaking, that made him co-owner of the property and everything permanently attached to it. While he couldn't sell the house without your signature, he could legally claim partial ownership of fixtures and possibly furnishings. So he can just take everything I own? And there's nothing I can do?" My voice rose with incredulity. "I didn't say that," Barbara corrected. "We have options. But they're limited, and, I must warn you, potentially expensive." She outlined the possibilities: a civil lawsuit for fraud and misrepresentation, a criminal complaint for elder abuse, attempts to void the power of attorney based on misrepresentation. Each option came with hurdles. "The police are unlikely to pursue this as criminal theft given the documentation he has," she explained. "They'll call it a civil matter." "I called them already," Marilyn added. "They said exactly that. And a civil case." Barbara hesitated. "Those can drag on for months, even years. The legal fees can mount quickly. And since Douglas and Rachel are now in France, international recovery adds another layer of complexity and expense." I finished for her, the weight of reality settling over me. "I'm afraid so. And forgive me for asking, but what are your financial resources for pursuing this?" I stared at my hands. "Limited. I have my teacher's pension. About 10,000 in savings. Most of my nest egg was tied up in my home equity." Barbara nodded, making notes. "And your son? Likely knows this. He knows everything about my finances," I admitted bitterly. "I kept no secrets from him." After the meeting, Marilyn and I stopped by my house again. A neighbor I barely knew approached us in the driveway. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Tim from 2 doors down. I just wanted to say how nice your son was during your move." The movers were making a lot of noise, and he came over to apologize, explained you were downsizing to a nice retirement village. Said they were carefully cataloging everything to make sure it got to you safely. I couldn't even respond. Marilyn thanked him and ushered me inside. The neighbors said the moving company came with a large truck, Marilyn told me once we were alone. "North Star Moving. I called them pretending to be you, asking about your delivery schedule." "What did they say?" "That your son had directed them to deliver everything to a storage facility near the airport. Paid cash. After that, a different company must have handled international shipping." I sat on the floor of my empty living room, leaning against the wall where my family photos once hung. "How long do you think he was planning this?" Marilyn hesitated before answering. "I checked their social media before they blocked me too. Rachel's been posting about French adventures and Paris dreams for at least 6 months. There were hints even further back. 6 months. While I was cooking Sunday dinners and buying birthday gifts, my son was plotting to strip me of everything I owned." The next day brought another blow. Barbara called with news from her investigator. Douglas and Rachel created an LLC 3 months ago. American Heritage Finds. They registered a business license in Paris for importing and selling American vintage furniture. My possessions weren't just funding their trip, they were inventory for a business built on stealing from me. My son hadn't just betrayed me, he'd built his future on that betrayal. Marilyn's couch became my bed. Her guest towels, my towels. Her coffee cup, mine. At 62 years old, I had become completely dependent on my younger sister's charity. The humiliation was almost as painful as the betrayal. "Stay as long as you need," Marilyn insisted. "The house feels less empty with you here." But I saw the strain my presence caused. Marilyn and her husband Tom were recently retired, planning their own dream trips and activities. Having a devastated sister camping in their living room wasn't part of those plans. Sleep eluded me night after night. When I did drift off, I'd jerk awake from nightmares standing in empty rooms, calling for Douglas while he walked away, laughing. During the day, I'd catch myself staring at walls, replaying memories, looking for signs I'd missed. Douglas at 5, running to me with a handmade Mother's Day card. Douglas at 12, brave at his father's funeral, holding my hand to comfort me even through his own grief. Douglas at 18, his graduation speech thanking me for my sacrifices. Douglas at 30, walking me down the aisle at his wedding because Mark couldn't be there. Had it all been a performance? Had I raised a sociopath who could mimic human attachment without feeling it? "You need to eat, Judy," Marilyn would say, placing food in front of me that I could barely touch. "You need your strength." Strength for what? My future stretched before me, barren as my empty house. At 62, my career as an elementary school teacher was behind me. My savings, minimal. My possessions, gone. I had nothing to fall back on, nothing to rebuild with. Despite Marilyn's protests, I began job hunting. The results were predictably discouraging. The first interviewer, a young woman barely older than my former students, looked at my resume with thinly veiled skepticism. "Your teaching experience is impressive," she said, in a tone suggesting the opposite. "But this administrative position requires current technology skills." "I'm a quick learner," I assured her. "I kept up with educational technology throughout my career." "Yes, but our systems are quite advanced." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We'll keep your resume on file." 5 more interviews yielded similar results. No one said, "You're too old," but the message came through clearly enough. My skills were dated, my experience not directly applicable, my salary expectations unrealistic for an entry-level position. Depression settled over me like a physical weight. I stopped getting dressed unless absolutely necessary. Showering seemed pointless. I'd catch Marilyn and Tom exchanging concerned glances when they thought I wasn't looking. "Have you considered a support group?" Marilyn suggested one evening after another silent dinner. "There must be others who've experienced something similar." To appease her, I agreed to attend a meeting at the senior center. "Financial Exploitation Recovery Group," the flyer proclaimed. I expected a few sad souls sharing tearful stories. What I found instead was a room full of angry survivors, mostly women, mostly my age or older. They introduced themselves by first names only. Ellen, whose grandson emptied her bank account for gambling debts. Patricia, whose nephew convinced her to sign over her lake house, then evicted her. James, whose stepdaughter stole his late wife's jewelry collection. "I'm Judith," I said when my turn came. "My son sold everything I owned while I was away for a weekend." He and his wife took the money to Paris. No gasps of shock, no pitying looks, just nods of recognition and understanding. "Classic," said the group leader, a social worker named Diane. "Family members are the most common perpetrators of elder financial abuse. They have access, trust, and often legal connections that make their crimes difficult to prosecute." After the meeting, a woman approached me. Carol, around 70, with short gray hair and alert eyes. "My daughter did something similar," she said without preamble, "cleaned out my accounts to support her boyfriend's startup." When I confronted her, she said I'd agreed to invest. Made me doubt my own memory. "How did you handle it?" I asked. "Badly, at first. Depression, isolation, shame, then anger, then action." She handed me her card. I run a smaller support group, more focused on recovery and response than just emotional support. We meet Thursdays at the library. Come, if you're interested. That night, I had my first real breakdown. In Marilyn's shower, water running to mask the sound, I collapsed to my knees and sobbed until I was empty. I cried for all I'd lost, not just possessions, but the son I thought I had, the relationship I'd valued above all others. I mourned the mother-son bond that had apparently existed only in my imagination. When the tears finally stopped, something unexpected remained. A small, hard kernel of resolve. Douglas had taken my furniture, my memorabilia, my security. I wouldn't let him take my future too. The next morning, I got up early, showered, and dressed before Marilyn awoke. I made coffee and toast, then called Barbara Jenkins. "I need a realistic assessment," I said when she answered. "What can I actually accomplish legally, given my limited resources?" "Honestly?" Barbara paused. "Criminal charges are unlikely without stronger evidence of coercion. A civil suit is possible but expensive, especially with international complications, so I have no real options." I didn't say that. We could file for an emergency injunction to freeze any U.S. assets they still have. Invalidate the power of attorney going forward. And there are less conventional approaches some of my clients have found effective. Less conventional? Let's just say sometimes pressure can be applied outside the courtroom. I know some people who might be able to help. "Are you free Thursday evening?" "Thursday. Carol's meeting. I have something at the library at 7. "Perfect," Barbara replied. "That's exactly where we need to be. First rule of fighting back: know your enemy's movements." Carol stood at the head of a small conference room in the library basement. About 10 women and 2 men sat around a table, including Barbara Jenkins and me. Carol projected an image onto the wall, a perfectly composed Instagram photo of the Eiffel Tower. "Social media is both their weakness and our window into their world." The photo expanded to show the caption, "New Beginnings in the City of Light." The account name, @Rachel Wilson Design. "Most people don't realize how much information they give away online," Carol continued. "Their location, routine, business plans, connections, all public for anyone paying attention." After the initial shock of finding Rachel's still public Instagram account, I'd been unable to look away. Like probing a sore tooth with my tongue, I kept returning to the page, scrolling through images of my daughter-in-law, living her Parisian fantasy funded by my life's possessions. "Judith has already discovered their social media," Barbara said. "But she needs help monitoring and documenting everything systematically." A woman with close-cropped silver hair raised her hand. "I can set up alerts for any mentions of their names or business. I'm Diane, by the way. Former IT security specialist." "Thank you," I managed, still staring at the projection. Carol clicked to the next image. My breath caught. There, in Rachel's carefully curated Parisian apartment, sat my grandmother's armchair. The one where I'd nursed Douglas as a baby. The chair he'd sold for cash. "They're not just living in Paris," Carol explained to the group. "They're opening a business, American Heritage Finds, selling curated vintage American furniture to wealthy Europeans." Another click showed Rachel's design blog. The headline, "From dusty American attics to chic Parisian apartments, giving vintage pieces new life." The accompanying photos showcased my dining room table, refinished and styled with French linens. My bookcase, repainted a fashionable gray. My mother's jewelry box, displayed as a unique accent piece. "Rachel writes about rescuing these treasures from neglect," Carol continued. She describes hunting for forgotten gems in provincial American homes, without mentioning those homes belonged to her mother-in-law. The room was silent as everyone absorbed this information. Finally, Helen, the retired detective, spoke up. "They've created quite a paper trail. Business registration, import documentation, sales records. All potential leverage points." I'd been quiet, struggling to process seeing my belongings repurposed as merchandise. "What leverage?" "They're in France. They've blocked me. They clearly don't care about my feelings, but they care about their business," Helen replied. "Their reputation, their profits, their legal standing in France. Those are all pressure points." Carol nodded. Which brings us to phase 1 of our response. Judith, we need you to create a fake social media account to follow them closely. Something that won't trigger their suspicions. I don't know how to do that, I admitted. We'll help, Diane assured me. Nothing complicated. Just a basic profile that lets you watch without being recognized. By the end of the meeting, I had a new Instagram identity, Emily Laurent, a middle-aged French art enthusiast interested in American vintage furniture. My profile picture was a stock photo of a woman photographing the Seine, face not visible. Within hours, Rachel had accepted my follow request, eager for potential European customers. Through this digital peephole, I watched my son and his wife build a business with my stolen property. I saw my mother's silver candelabra on their dining table, my father's reading lamp beside their bed, Douglas wearing his father's watch, the one memento of mark I'd saved specifically for our son. Most devastating was a post featuring Rachel wearing my mother's pearl necklace, my inheritance, meant to be passed down through generations. Vintage pearls add timeless elegance to any outfit. Heirloom-style vintage treasures, read the caption. I showed the image to Carol during our next meeting, my hands shaking with rage. Good, she said simply. Hold on to that anger. We're going to need it. Helen had been investigating their business operations. They're not properly registered for import divided by export, she reported. The paperwork for bringing large furniture shipments into France requires declarations of origin and value. Either they lied on those forms or they didn't file them correctly. And they're certainly not reporting all their income, Barbara added. Based on the prices listed on their website, they're making substantial profits which should be taxed in both France and the US. Tax evasion? I asked, surprised by this direction. International tax and import authorities take these matters very seriously, Helen explained. Much more seriously than they take family disputes over furniture. The group's plan began taking shape. Anonymous tips to French tax authorities about potential evasion. Documentation of the furniture's true origin. A website chronicling the real story behind American heritage finds, ready to be shared with their business partners and customers. Is this ethical? I asked hesitantly. I want justice, not revenge. This isn't revenge, Carol said firmly. This is consequences. Your son and his wife committed fraud. They stole from you. They're profiting from that theft. They should face appropriate legal repercussions. Watching the determined faces around me, I realized something important. These women weren't just helping me, they were fighting for themselves too. Each had experienced betrayal by family, been dismissed by authorities, left to cope with both financial loss and shattered trust. Together, we were refusing to remain silent victims. That night, I discovered another blog post from Rachel, featuring a photo of my wedding ring, the simple gold band Mark had placed on my finger 40 years ago. I'd kept it in my jewelry box after his death, unable to wear it but unwilling to part with it. The caption read, "Vintage gold bands make perfect stacking rings. This one pairs beautifully with modern pieces for an eclectic look." She had taken my wedding ring. She was selling my wedding ring. Any remaining doubts about our plan vanished. The next morning, I called Carol. "I'm all in," I said. "Whatever it takes." The library conference room had become command central for what Helen jokingly called Operation Empty Nest. Our group had expanded and organized into teams, each focusing on different aspects of our response to Douglas and Rachel's theft. Carol introduced me to everyone formally at our next meeting. "This is Judith Wilson." Her son, Douglas, and daughter-in-law, Rachel, stole her entire household to start a vintage furniture business in Paris. We're going to help her get justice. Around the table sat an unlikely alliance of women who had faced similar betrayals. Helen, the retired detective who specialized in family fraud cases, had seen hundreds of financial elder abuse cases during her career. The justice system often fails victims of family financial abuse, she explained. The burden of proof is high, and many cases get dismissed as family matters rather than crimes. Diane, the tech expert, had lost her retirement savings to her nephew's investment scam. Now she used her digital skills to track fraudsters and help victims recover. "Most people leave digital footprints everywhere," she told me. "Your son and his wife are no exception." Barbara Jenkins, my attorney, had joined our group officially. I've seen too many clients devastated by family financial abuse, she said. The legal system doesn't always provide adequate remedies. Sometimes we need to get creative. There was also Marilyn, my sister, who attended despite her initial skepticism. I still can't believe Douglas would do this, she admitted. But the evidence is undeniable, and you need all the support you can get. Carol herself had the most similar experience to mine. Her daughter had emptied her bank accounts and sold her lake house, claiming Carol had agreed to finance her boyfriend's business venture. She knew exactly what she was doing, Carol told me privately. She targeted my assets systematically, just like Douglas targeted yours. Other members included Susan, whose brother had stolen her inheritance, Margaret, whose grandson had forged checks from her account, and Peter, whose stepson had transferred his house deed through fraudulent documents. Together, they formed a formidable team with diverse skills and a shared mission: holding family fraudsters accountable. Our first strategy session focused on gathering intelligence. We need to document everything, Helen instructed. Every social media post showing your possessions, every business transaction, every communication before and after the theft. Build a timeline that proves premeditation. Diane had created a secure digital workspace where we could organize evidence. I'm tracking their IP addresses, she explained. We know exactly when they're online and what they're doing. Barbara outlined our legal strategy. We're filing for an emergency injunction to freeze Douglas's U.S. bank accounts. We're invalidating the power of attorney, and we're preparing a civil complaint for fraud, conversion of property, and elder financial abuse. Will any of that actually work? I asked skeptically. They're in France with my possessions already sold. Maybe not directly, Barbara acknowledged. But it creates official records of wrongdoing. Those records become leverage. Carol then revealed the next phase. We've identified their business partners in Paris. The antique dealer who's showcasing their pieces. The design blogger who's promoting their shop. The wealthy clients who've made purchases. All will receive documented evidence of how these vintage treasures were actually acquired. The room fell silent as I absorbed this information. Part of me still hesitated at the thought of such aggressive action against my own son. Despite everything, some maternal instinct wanted to protect Douglas, to believe there must be some explanation, some misunderstanding. I know what you're thinking, Carol said gently. He's still your son. You love him despite what he's done. But consider this. By holding Douglas accountable, you might actually be helping him in the long run. Real love sometimes means allowing natural consequences. Tears blurred my vision as I nodded. When does this all happen? The notifications to their business partners? Not yet, Helen cautioned. First, we gather more evidence. Build our case. Identify all possible pressure points. We move deliberately, not emotionally. Over the following weeks, our group met regularly to implement our plan. I continued monitoring Rachel's social media through my fake account, documenting every photo that featured my possessions. Diane tracked their business activities, identifying financial transactions and customer interactions. Helen investigated their legal vulnerabilities in both U.S. and French jurisdictions. Meanwhile, I struggled to rebuild my own life. Marilyn had helped me furnish my empty house with basics: a simple bed, a used couch, a small dining table. The spaces remained bare compared to before. But at least I could move back home, regaining some independence. I'd found part-time work at a local bookstore, not enough to live on long-term, but sufficient to supplement my teacher's pension temporarily. The routine helped restore some normalcy to my days, though nights remained difficult. I would often wake at 3 a.m., rage or grief, driving sleep away. During one particularly dark night, I found myself staring at Douglas's childhood photos, trying to reconcile the smiling boy I'd raised with the man who could betray me so completely. On impulse, I texted him, knowing he'd probably blocked my number. Douglas, I still don't understand. Why? After everything we've been through together, why would you do this to me? Your mother who loves you. To my shock, 3 dots appeared. He was typing. Then, it was the only way. You wouldn't understand. It's not personal. Not personal? Stealing my life's possessions wasn't personal? Before I could respond, another message appeared. Rachel says I shouldn't be texting you. This is the last time. Don't contact us again. I showed the exchange to Carol the next day. This is actually helpful, she said. He responded. There's still some connection, some guilt. And he's placing blame on Rachel. Rachel says I shouldn't be texting you. He's creating distance between himself and the decision. You think Rachel is behind all this? I asked. I think it's more complicated than that. Carol replied carefully. People rarely commit these kinds of betrayals without personal motivation. Douglas may be influenced by Rachel, but he made his own choices. As our evidence mounted, a clearer picture emerged. Douglas and Rachel had been planning their Paris venture for nearly a year. They'd researched the market for American vintage furniture in Europe, identified potential clients, and calculated exactly how much startup capital they would need. My possessions had never been dusty or neglected. They were targeted specifically for their value in the Parisian market. The pieces they chose to take and the few they left behind revealed a calculated business strategy, not an impulsive act. We're ready for phase 2, Helen announced at our next meeting. It's time to apply pressure. I took a deep breath, thinking of Douglas's text. Not personal, as if that somehow absolved him. Let's do it, I said firmly. They made this business. Now they can face the business consequences. First target: French tax authorities. Helen placed a document on the table. Anonymous tip regarding potential import declaration violations by American Heritage Finds. Supporting evidence attached. Second, their business registration. Barbara pointed to another file. Documentation showing the business is operating without proper permits for selling antiques in Paris's 7th arrondissement. Third, their customer base. Diane pulled up a digital presentation. We've identified 15 clients who've purchased items through their website or shop. Each will receive documentation showing the true provenance of their ethically sourced vintage finds. Our counterattack had begun. After weeks of gathering intelligence and building our case, we were finally taking action against Douglas and Rachel's operation. The strategy wasn't about direct confrontation, but rather applying pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. Diane had discovered a critical legal vulnerability. They never filed the proper property transfer documents for most of your furniture, she explained. Douglas had power of attorney to sell items on your behalf, but legally, the proceeds should have gone to you, not him. This meant many of their customers had unknowingly purchased items with questionable ownership documentation, a serious concern in the high-end antique market, where provenance is essential. We're not accusing the buyers of wrongdoing, Barbara clarified. We're simply informing them that their purchases may have complicated ownership histories that could affect resale value. Helen had prepared a detailed dossier for the French tax and business regulatory authorities, documenting inconsistencies in American Heritage Finds import declarations and sales records. European countries take tax compliance very seriously, she noted, especially when it involves foreign businesses operating in luxury markets. Meanwhile, Carol had orchestrated a more public pressure campaign. We've created a website documenting the true story behind their inventory, she demonstrated. StolenHeritage.com includes photographs of your possessions in your home before the theft, alongside Rachel's Instagram posts showing the same items for sale. The website was professionally designed, emotionally compelling, and meticulously documented. It told my story without sensationalism, just the facts, with evidence supporting each claim. We're not publicizing this widely yet, Carol explained. For now, we're sharing it strategically with their business partners and potential investors. Among those partners was Gallery Beaumont, an exclusive antique dealer in Paris that had agreed to showcase American Heritage Finds collection. The gallery owner, Monsieur Beaumont, had been carefully cultivated by Rachel as a critical connection to wealthy clients. Monsieur Beaumont is very concerned about his reputation, Helen reported after making contact through a French colleague. He's asked for a meeting with Douglas and Rachel to discuss the troubling allegations regarding their inventory. Our next target was a high-profile design blogger who had featured American Heritage Finds in a must-visit Paris shopping article. Diane had sent her our documentation, and within hours, the blogger had removed all mentions of the shop from her website. We also set up fake potential buyers, friends of Helen's in Paris, who scheduled appointments to view expensive pieces, only to cancel after mentioning they had concerns about the provenance. The financial pressure came from another angle entirely. Barbara had succeeded in obtaining a temporary freeze on Douglas's remaining U.S. bank accounts, pending investigation of the power of attorney abuse. While the amount involved was relatively small, the action created official documentation of potential fraud. "We're not trying to bankrupt them," Barbara explained. "We're creating legitimate legal obstacles that force them to address their actions." Within 2 weeks, the effects of our campaign became visible through Rachel's social media. Her usually curated, upbeat posts took on a defensive tone, so disappointed by the jealousy and false rumors circulating about our business. "Success always brings critics," soon after she posted. "Some people will try to tear you down when you're building your dreams." Reminder that not everyone deserves your energy or explanation. Douglas remained absent from social media, but through my fake account, I noticed tension in Rachel's posts featuring him. His smiles looked strained. References to our journey and our vision gave way to my design aesthetic and my business contacts. The real breakthrough came when Helen's French contact reported that American Heritage Finds had received an official inquiry from tax authorities. The business would need to provide detailed documentation of all inventory, including origin, purchase price, and import declarations. "They can either admit they stole the items from you," Helen explained, "or they can manufacture false documentation, which constitutes tax fraud in France. Either way, they're in a difficult position." Our most strategic move targeted their upcoming store opening. Rachel had been promoting a grand opening event with invitations sent to influential designers, wealthy expatriates, and local dignitaries. Diane had managed to access their guest list through digital monitoring. "We've contacted each attendee individually," she reported. "Not accusatory, just informative. Before attending, you might want to be aware of the concerning allegations regarding this business." The morning of their grand opening, I received an unexpected text from an unknown French number. "What have you done? No one is coming. Stop this now." Rachel's panic was palpable even through text. I showed the message to our group, gathered for an update meeting. "This is actually perfect," Helen said. "She's acknowledging awareness of our campaign without admitting wrongdoing. Forward it to Barbara for documentation." Later that day, through the Emily Laurent account, I saw Rachel's desperate attempts to salvage the event. Instagram stories showed an empty shop, elegantly arranged with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, but no guests. Her captions remained upbeat. "Soft opening today. Official launch coming soon." But her real distress leaked through in a late-night post, hastily deleted but captured by Diane's monitoring software. "When everything you've worked for falls apart overnight." Rachel's panic was palpable even through text. I showed the message to our group, gathered for an update meeting. "They're feeling the pressure," Carol confirmed. "Now we wait for the response." We didn't wait long. 3 days later, Douglas called my number. I stared at my ringing phone in shock, showing it to Marilyn, who was visiting. Later that day, through the Emily Laurent account, I saw Rachel's desperate attempts to salvage the event. Instagram stories showed an empty shop, elegantly arranged with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, but no guests. Her captions remained upbeat. "Soft opening today. Official launch coming soon." But her real distress leaked through in a late-night post, hastily deleted but captured by Diane's monitoring software. "When everything you've worked for falls apart overnight." With trembling hands, I accepted the call, putting it on speaker. "Mom?" Douglas's voice sounded strained, distant. "We need to talk. What you're doing has to stop." Douglas's voice wavered between anger and desperation. "You're destroying everything we've built." "Everything you built with my possessions," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "With my furniture. My memories. My life." "It wasn't like that. You don't understand." The familiar excuse, now delivered with less conviction. "Then help me understand, Douglas. Explain to me how my son, whom I raised alone, whom I sacrificed everything for, could steal from me while I was visiting my sister." Silence stretched across the international connection. Finally, he sighed. "It was Rachel's idea at first. She saw the value in your outdated furniture, her words, not mine. Said we could make triple its worth in Paris. I told her no, obviously. Obviously, I repeated, my voice flat with disbelief. But then, things got complicated. His voice dropped. I had debts, gambling, online poker. I kept thinking I could win it back. But it just got worse. Rachel found out. She was going to leave me. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Gambling debts? My son, the responsible financial advisor who had managed my accounts, had a gambling addiction? How much? I asked. Almost 50,000. The collection agencies were calling. My credit was destroyed. Rachel said the only way to save our marriage was a fresh start. Paris, her dream city, with a business that could support us. Your furniture was the solution to everything, so you stole from me to save your marriage. The pieces were finally falling into place. You betrayed your mother to fix your mistakes. I was desperate. His voice cracked. I convinced myself you wouldn't miss most of it. That you'd understand eventually. That once the business succeeded, I could replace everything with cheap reproductions from IKEA. I quoted his note bitterly. So you stole from me to save your marriage. The pieces were finally falling into place. You betrayed your mother to fix your mistakes. I closed my eyes, processing this information. My mind flashed to memories of Douglas as a teenager, how he'd once stolen money from my purse to buy video games. How I'd sat him down for a long talk about trust and integrity. How he'd promised never to steal again. The business is failing, he continued when I didn't respond. Rachel's furious. She's blaming me for everything. Says, I should have known you'd fight back. She didn't think I would? The question escaped before I could stop it. She said you were too passive. Too trusting. That you'd accept whatever happened because you'd never want to make trouble for me. His voice broke again. She said you were the perfect victim. The cruelty of this assessment took my breath away. Rachel had analyzed me as a target, identified my vulnerabilities, my love for my son, my avoidance of conflict, and exploited them methodically. Douglas, I need to know something, I said finally. Where is my wedding ring? The one you took from my jewelry box. A long pause. Rachel sold it. To a collector. Before I knew about it. My wedding ring, the simple gold band Mark had placed on my finger. The symbol of our life together. The single most precious object I owned sold to a stranger. Something inside me hardened permanently. This is what's going to happen, I said, my voice now perfectly calm. You're going to email Barbara Jenkins a complete inventory of everything you took from my house, with current location and status of each item. You're going to sign a notarized statement admitting what you did. You're going to return anything that hasn't been sold yet. And you're going to establish a repayment plan for the rest. Mom, that's impossible. We don't have. If you don't, I continued as if he hadn't spoken, we will proceed with full legal action. The French authorities have already been notified about potential import violations. Your business partners have received documentation about stolen merchandise. Your clients are questioning their purchases. You're destroying us. The desperation in his voice was unmistakable now. No, Douglas. You destroyed us when you decided your gambling debts were more important than our relationship. When you chose Rachel's approval over your mother's trust. When you sold my wedding ring to a stranger. After hanging up, I sat motionless, staring at the wall of my sparsely furnished living room. Marilyn placed a hand on my shoulder, wordlessly offering support. Gambling, I said finally. All of this because he couldn't stop gambling. The next day brought an email from Rachel, not to me, but to Barbara. The tone veered between accusatory and pleading. This vendetta against us is completely disproportionate to what happened. Douglas made a mistake with his mother's possessions, but this coordinated attack on our business and reputation is vindictive and cruel. We're facing financial ruin because of your actions. If this continues, we'll have no choice but to take legal action for defamation and harassment. Barbara forwarded it to me with a single comment. Classic Darvo deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. She's panicking. Over the following week, Rachel's carefully curated social media presence unraveled completely. The aspirational posts about Parisian entrepreneurship gave way to bitter complaints about betrayal and sabotage. She began publicly blaming Douglas for their troubles. When your husband's poor decisions impact your dreams and livelihood, then finding out the person you trusted has been hiding destructive behaviors throughout your relationship. Finally, sometimes walking away is the only option. Your mental health comes first. Helen's contact in Paris confirmed what these posts suggested. Rachel had left Douglas and returned to her wealthy family in Connecticut. The apartment was for sale. American Heritage Finds had ceased operations entirely. Douglas, now alone in Paris with mounting legal troubles, finally reached out directly. "Mom, I don't know what to do. Rachel's gone. The business is finished. French authorities are investigating our imports. I can't even afford a plane ticket home. I know I don't deserve your help after what I did, but I'm desperate." I shared the message with our support group during our next meeting. "Classic manipulator's plea," Carol observed. "Notice how he positions himself as the victim. Even now, what are you going to do?" Diane asked gently. I'd been asking myself the same question since receiving his message. Part of me, the mother who had nursed him through childhood illnesses, who had celebrated his achievements and comforted his disappointments, wanted to rescue him immediately. Another part, the woman who had slept on her sister's couch, who had lost precious mementos of her marriage, who had been calculated as the perfect victim, wanted him to experience the full consequences of his actions. "I'm not sending money," I said finally. But I told him to provide Barbara with the full inventory and signed statement we requested. Once he does that, I'll help him navigate coming home to face whatever legal consequences await. "That's very generous," Helen commented. "Many in your position wouldn't offer any help at all." "It's not generosity," I clarified. "It's boundaries. I can support him through accountability without enabling him. He needs to face what he's done if he's ever going to change." 2 days later, Barbara received a detailed spreadsheet listing every item taken from my house, along with current status sold. In storage, in the Paris apartment. Douglas had also provided a notarized statement admitting to the theft and accepting full responsibility. Most surprisingly, he'd included contact information for the buyers of several significant pieces, including my grandmother's piano. I'd been asking myself the same question since receiving his message. Part of me, the mother who had nursed him through childhood illnesses, who had celebrated his achievements and comforted his disappointments, wanted to rescue him immediately. Another part, the woman who had slept on her sister's couch, who had lost precious mementos of her marriage, who had been calculated as the perfect victim, wanted him to experience the full consequences of his actions. "That's very generous," Helen commented. "Many in your position wouldn't offer any help at all." "This is actually quite thorough," Barbara noted as we reviewed the document together. "It gives us a starting point for potentially recovering some items. Possibly, though the documentation you initially signed gives him some legal cover. More likely would be civil penalties and restitution requirements." Barbara's expression tightened. "That's more complicated." She could argue she believed Douglas had legitimate authority to sell the items. Unless we can prove she knew about the deception, she may avoid legal responsibility. The injustice burned, but I had come to accept that perfect justice was rarely possible in these situations. Rachel might escape legal consequences, but she had lost her business, her Parisian dream, and hopefully learned that not everyone was a perfect victim. A week later, Douglas returned to the United States. I didn't meet his plane. Instead, Barbara arranged for him to come directly to her office, where I waited with the support group members who had become my closest allies through this ordeal. When Douglas entered the conference room, I barely recognized him. My once confident, well-dressed son looked haggard and defeated. His expensive clothes hung loosely on his frame. Dark circles underlined bloodshot eyes. He stopped short at the sight of me sitting with 5 determined women. "Mom," he began, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." I held up my hand, stopping him. "This isn't the time for apologies, Douglas. This is the time for solutions. These women have helped me survive what you did to me. Now they're going to help us determine how you make amends." His eyes darted around the room, taking in the resolute faces of Carol, Helen, Barbara, Diane, and Marilyn. For the first time, perhaps, he understood that his mother was not alone and unprotected, that she had found strength he never suspected she possessed. "Whatever it takes," he said quietly, sinking into an empty chair. "I'll do whatever it takes." 6 months later, I stood in my living room, watching morning light filter through new curtains. The space looked different now, more modern, less cluttered, but still recognizably mine. A few recovered pieces mixed with new purchases created a home that honored my past while acknowledging my changed circumstances. The recovery process had been both more successful and more challenging than anticipated. Through Barbara's legal efforts, we had located several of my most treasured items: my grandmother's piano now back in its place of honor, a few family photographs returned by sympathetic buyers, my father's desk reclaimed from storage. Other possessions were gone forever, sold to unknown collectors or incorporated into Parisian homes. My wedding ring remained lost. Despite Douglas's efforts to track down the buyer, some losses I had come to accept. Others still caused a sharp pain when remembered. Douglas was living in a small apartment across town, working through the terms of our formal restitution agreement. The gambling addiction that had driven his desperate actions was being addressed through a recovery program and therapy. Our relationship remained fragile, held together by carefully maintained boundaries rather than the blind trust I once offered. Rachel had indeed escaped legal consequences, shielded by her family's resources and connections. I occasionally saw glimpses of her new life through social media back in Connecticut, working at her father's investment firm, the Paris adventure rarely mentioned. I had stopped following her activities, finding the energy better directed toward my own healing. That healing had come largely through the women who rallied around me in my darkest moments. What began as a support group for victims had evolved into something more powerful: a consulting network for vulnerable seniors, elder financial protection advocates. Read the business card I now carried proudly. Our services included educational workshops, one-on-one consultations, and preventive planning. Carol, Helen, Diane, Barbara, and I had formalized our alliance, each contributing specialized knowledge gained through our own experiences. My role focused on parent-child financial dynamics, helping aging parents establish healthy boundaries with adult children while protecting their assets. My story, painful as it was, provided powerful testimony about the importance of maintaining financial independence even within loving family relationships. "You should hear Judith speak," Carol often told potential clients. "She transforms her trauma into wisdom that protects others." That afternoon, I was scheduled to address a community center gathering on protecting your financial security while supporting adult children. My presentation included practical safeguards, warning signs of exploitation, and resources for those already experiencing abuse. As I gathered my materials, my phone chimed with a message from Douglas. "Good luck with your presentation today. Proud of the work you're doing." Our communication remained largely practical, focused on restitution payments and occasional progress updates. These small personal messages represented his attempts to rebuild some semblance of relationship attempts I acknowledged without fully reciprocating. Trust, once shattered, could not be instantly restored through words alone. The doorbell rang, announcing Marilyn's arrival to drive me to the community center. Our sisterly bond had deepened through this ordeal, her unwavering support providing foundation when everything else crumbled. "Ready to change some lives?" she asked as I opened the door. "One cautionary tale at a time," I replied with a small smile. At the community center, about 30 seniors gathered, many accompanied by adult children who participated as allies rather than potential threats. I recognized the mixture of vulnerability and resilience in their faces, the same expression I'd seen in my own mirror during the darkest days. "My name is Judith Wilson," I began after Carol's introduction. 6 months ago, I returned home from a weekend away to find an empty house. My son had sold all my furniture, family heirlooms, and personal belongings to finance his move to Paris with his wife. Today, I want to share what I've learned about protecting yourself from those you love most and how to rebuild when trust is broken. As I spoke, I watched understanding dawn in the eyes of my audience. Some nodded in recognition of risks they'd never consciously acknowledged. Others took furious notes on preventive measures. A few wiped away tears, perhaps recognizing their own experiences in my story. "The most important lesson I've learned," I concluded, "is that loving someone doesn't mean surrendering your security. Helping your children doesn't require sacrificing your future. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for healthy relationships across generations." After the presentation, several attendees approached to share their own stories or ask specific questions. An elderly man gripped my hand tightly. "My son has been pushing me to add him to my bank accounts for emergency purposes," he confided. After hearing your story, I'm going to find another solution. That's exactly why we do this work, I told him, directing him toward Diane for specific recommendations. Later that evening, our core group gathered at Carol's home to debrief. These women had become my closest friends, bound by shared experience and common purpose. Our backgrounds varied widely: Carol's corporate leadership career, Helen's law enforcement expertise, Diane's technical brilliance, Barbara's legal knowledge, but together, we formed a powerhouse of advocacy for vulnerable seniors. 3 more consultations scheduled from today's presentation, Helen reported, reviewing her notes. And the community college wants us for their senior education series next month. The website traffic has doubled since last week, Diane added. Our resources page is getting particular attention. As they continued discussing operational details, I found myself reflecting on the strange path that had led me here. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had ultimately revealed strengths I never knew I possessed. The emptiness of my house had created space for new purpose and connection. Douglas's monthly restitution payments would never fully replace what was lost, but they funded our advocacy work, transforming his debt into community benefit. My teacher's pension, once barely adequate, now supplemented by consultation fees, provided financial security I hadn't imagined possible after the theft. Judith? Carol's voice broke into my thoughts. Any final reflections to add to our meeting notes? I considered for a moment. Just that empty houses can be refilled, I said finally. Not with the same furniture, perhaps, but with new purpose, stronger boundaries, and wiser perspectives. Later that night, alone in my partially restored home, I opened the small wooden box containing the few family mementos Douglas had missed, or Rachel hadn't deemed valuable enough to take my father's pipe: a chipped teacup from my grandmother's set, a handful of photographs too personal to interest collectors. Among them lay a letter Douglas had written during his first month of gambling recovery. I had read it many times, each reading bringing complicated emotions. Later that night, alone in my partially restored home, I opened the small wooden box containing the few family mementos Douglas had missed, or Rachel hadn't deemed valuable enough to take my father's pipe: a chipped teacup from my grandmother's set, a handful of photographs too personal to interest collectors. Mom, I can never adequately express my remorse for betraying you. I violated not just your home but the lifetime of love and sacrifice you gave me. My actions reflect my worst self, the self I'm working to understand and change. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I recognize the full extent of my betrayal. Your strength in responding has taught me more than a lifetime of your protection ever could. I returned the letter to its place among my diminished but treasured possessions. Some days I believed in his redemption. Others I questioned whether true change was possible. The answer would reveal itself only through time and consistent action. What I knew with certainty was this: I had survived being emptied. I had rebuilt with intention rather than accumulation. I had transformed victimhood into advocacy. Whatever relationship Douglas and I might salvage would be founded on reality rather than maternal illusion. I moved to the window, gazing out at the neighborhood settling into evening routines. From emptiness had come fullness of a different kind. From betrayal had come wisdom. From loss had come purpose. My home contained fewer possessions now, but it held something more valuable: a woman who knew her own strength, who maintained boundaries with love, who transformed her suffering into service for others. What's your story of betrayal and recovery? Have you ever had to rebuild trust with someone who hurt you deeply? Share your experience in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that survival is not just possible but transformative. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, sometimes the emptiest houses create space for the fullest lives.